Have you ever really thought about the power of a final request? A person's last words, they just carry a special kind of weight, don't they? In this explainer, we're going to dive into one of the most powerful final prayers ever recorded and what it shows us about the divine architecture of unity. And this, right here, is the heart of it. This is from the 17th chapter of John. In his final prayer for his followers, Jesus doesn't pray for their success or their comfort or their power. No, he prays for their oneness. He makes this incredible plea for them to be unified, and then he links that unity directly to one huge outcome, that the world may believe. So, if unity is the mission, what happens when that mission gets compromised? What's the real cost when this prayer is ignored? Well, the source material is incredibly clear on this point. It's a pretty stark and direct equation. Jesus himself says it twice in that short prayer from John 17. Our oneness is the evidence, it's the proof, so that the world may know that you have sent me. So when that oneness is fractured, the world's ability to believe gets fractured right along with it. The stakes you see aren't just about internal harmony, they're about the mission itself.
Okay, so how do we do this? If unity is so absolutely vital, what's the blueprint? Fortunately, the path is laid out for us, and it all begins with understanding our true identity.
Now, what's fascinating here is how two different parts of Scripture line up perfectly on the same principle. Over in John chapter 17, you have Jesus praying for his followers to be unified. Then, decades later, you have the Apostle Paul writing to a church in Philippi. He tells them in chapter 1, verse 27 to conduct themselves in a manner worthy of that truth. See, it's the exact same core idea. Our unity is rooted in how we live out our beliefs.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the depth of what Paul was saying. The Greek word he uses in Philippians 1:27 is polutio omai. It's not just about behaving well, it literally means to live as a citizen. It's a call to conduct ourselves as members of a completely different kingdom, the kingdom of heaven.
So what does a citizen of this heavenly kingdom even look like? Well, the Sermon on the Mount paints this beautiful, radical picture. It's someone who is poor in spirit, meek, merciful, and pure in heart. They are peacemakers. And get this, they don't just tolerate their enemies, they actively love them. This isn't some political identity, it's a spiritual one through and through.
The ancient prophet Micah, way back in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, gives us what might be the most perfect summary of this heavenly conduct. To do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That's it. That's the code of conduct for a citizen of heaven, and it's the very foundation of unity. So if this picture of heavenly citizenship is the key to unity, what's the main obstacle? What keeps this from becoming a reality? We have to identify the antagonist in this story. Think about it for a moment. What's the one thing that consistently undermines mercy, humility, and peacemaking? What is the root cause of so much conflict? It's one word, but its impact is absolutely devastating. The ultimate source of strife is pride. That desire to feel better about ourselves, to put ourselves first, to cut others down to our size. It is the direct opposite of heavenly citizenship. This quote just states it so plainly. Where pride and ambition are welcomed, the spirit that creates unity leaves. And what comes in to take its place? Dissension and strife, all meant to weaken and distract. Pride is like a corrosive agent that just dissolves the bonds of oneness.
But the story does not end there. If pride is the poison, there is a powerful antidote. The path back to the oneness Jesus prayed for is clear, and it involves actively fighting back against our own pride.
So the antidote, then, is simple but profound. The path to unity is paved with the very things that pride destroys. We have to learn humility and practice meekness, just like Jesus himself modeled. And this isn't a passive state, but an active, daily choice to live out the character of a citizen of heaven.
And that leaves us with a final, powerful question to consider. In our relationships, in our communities, in our world, what would change if we truly lived as citizens of another kingdom? What would our world look like if we consciously chose the path of humility over the instinct of pride? The answer just might be the world that Jesus prayed for.